Welcome everybody. This is going to be an overview of excuse me, patient care charting, trip tickets, chart, run report, whatever you want to call it, but using the image trend EMS field bridge documentation tool that we're using here at Lake County Ambulance Service. So once you log into the system, this is your opening screen that you'll end up seeing. And there's a couple of things on here. And for those of you that have been using it a while, there will be a few changes and some things that, from what you've been doing in the past. For those of you that are seeing this for the first time, this will all be new and just the way it is. This is what's called the dashboard. And you'll have previous runs or runs that are open or that you have been involved in the last couple of days. The person who is logged into the system itself will show up here in the upper right. In this case, it's got my name up here. As long as one of the people that are actually involved with the call is listed here, that's okay. Where that gets to be a trouble is, say the night shift was logged into the computer, you take a run in the morning, and the night crew's name is still up here. You even put your names in where they go. They would then still have access to that run, which is a potential violation for privacy and data protection type stuff, protected health information. So at the beginning of your shift, log anybody else out, log one of your current crew in, and then you're good to go from there. Then the other thing I would suggest is syncing. When you log in, you'll have an option to sync. I would suggest doing that. By syncing, that brings in previous patients that have been transported, that brings in previous all their demographic information, any new staff members, any new medications or procedures that we may have added to the system in the last any number of days, so that the repeat patient database will be updated, the medications will be updated, etc. So doing that throughout the day will also bring in any of the runs that have happened throughout the day, in case you say somebody brings somebody into the ER and then you end up doing a transfer out later. If you didn't sync, they would not be in your computer necessarily, so you'd have to re-enter the information. That we'd have double the number of people on the frequent flyer database. Anyway, so this dashboard is a tool that you can use, but you have to use with caution. You can certainly put in which truck you're in. For example, today I'm 833 and my call sign is, because I'm backup, LCAS 2. And it is myself and Mr. Mike. There we go. And this is not what they have to do all day, but this is the default for the run. Not fire company, he's the driver. Somebody always has to be the driver. I know we all take care of patients, even when we do the driving, but who is the driver from the scene to the destination? Generally, that would also be the driver if you're working same system crew. So two EMTs working, the person in the passenger seat on the way to the call is the primary patient care provider. The driver stays the driver and the assistant throughout the rest of the run, that kind of a thing. ALS, it's a little different because it depends on what the call is, if it's a cardiac, or if there's ALS interventions or assessments, etc. So this is the default, and the only reason that this dashboard, or why you could set this up, is so that when you start a run, it will automatically populate this information where it needs to go. As with everything, we have templated runs, we have default settings for a number of things to make data entry easier and faster. If something isn't the default, it needs to be changed. So for example, if I start a run right now, it'll put me as the primary provider and Mike is the driver. Well, if Mike ends up taking the call, he needs to go in the chart and change those roles in the chart. So it's just a way to get things started and get things imported a little bit faster. So again, if we're only doing 1 or 2 calls a day, it's not going to save you a lot of time, but it is a tool that can be used. But be careful using the tools. That they're just to make things easier, but know what they're there for. So let's go on and show you some of the other stuff in here. In here, there are some things that you can do where user settings. The big one for me is the single panel behavior, only one panel open at a time. So you can turn that on. That's an individual thing based on this user. So that allows only one tab to be open at a time. So if you go to the next tab within a screen, it closes the previous one. Excuse me. So it's kind of a handy thing. Then a couple of this other stuff in here. The sync is there. You probably won't see this because it's under my username, so I have more permissions. The create new incident button creates a new completely blank incident. There's nothing pre-filled out. It's a default just empty incident. So if you pull that, you're going to have to go through and put in everything about the call, vehicle type, response modes, etc., etc. What I've done up here is if you create a new incident from a template, there are a number of, excuse me again, templates covering the things that we do most. Now, coverage is only for posting at Gooseberry when we're covering internally. So if one truck is out and we're covering for another truck, that would be used to record that posting that we're calling it. Then there's the 911 calls, which is 2/3 or probably or 3/4 of our calls, and then the Lakeview Hospital transfer template. And so, for example, when you pull a templated runs, a number of forms or fields are already filled out. The hospital, because almost all of our transfers are out of that hospital, we can already pre-populate the scene address. We can do the response request as being an interfacility transfer, that the response was immediate, that we did no lights and sirens, and that we transported no lights and sirens. Things like that, because that's what we do most of the time. Now, if it turns out to be a code 3 transfer, then we would change those responses once we open that transfer or open that template. But that saves a lot of time, and it actually adds some consistency to some of our reporting. So what I'm going to pull now, though, is the 911, just so you can see what it's like. I'm going to go page by page and field by field and just kind of talk about what each of those are and how you can use those things. So creating a new incident from a template. This is a 911 call. Now, on our tough books in the ambulances, the incident and call number will auto-populate. So it creates its own run number based on an internal clock or counter, and it just assigns that for you. So you don't need to put anything in there, but those two numbers should match. This number's meant to be which patient or which part of this incident are we talking about related to this incident number. So in the past, this had been used as a count of how many calls we've been going on or how many ambulances are going out. This is to reflect now how many patients are related to this run number or incident number, call number thing here. Most of the time that'll be a 1. Where it might be different is if you had say a car crash that you went to, or and there's 3 people involved, you are taking 1 but signing 2. So you would have patient care number, you'd have PCR number 1 for one of the patients, 2 for the second patient, 3 for the third patient. And I'll show you what that's kind of interesting with this. If you can get it to work, if you're using this in real time, it saves you some data entry. So I'll show you that in a minute. So those numbers need to be filled out. Another quick note, as you see, some of this stuff is red, some of the stuff is blue. And in the past, the standard had been to make sure everything was blue, not red. That isn't the case anymore. Those are what's called validity rules. And the validity rules are things that we look at the form and parts of it that are important or that don't make logical sense, might flag something. And there are a point scale. And if you look over here, we're down, from 100, we're down to 51 or whatever, because a number of information is missing. If it's red, go ahead and figure out why, and I'll show you some tricks on that as we get to the end. If you have that information, fill it in. If you don't have that information, for example, a social security number, if the patient's unresponsive, patient doesn't know it, patient doesn't, it's a child that doesn't have a family member with it, and we can't find it from the hospital, whatever, just leave it blank. And then when you post the run, it will flag or show you, ask a couple questions, says, hey, social security number's missing. Just put in patient was a minor, couldn't remember, or patient was unresponsive. Just put an explanation as to why the validity wasn't met. It's called validity exception. And it's okay. The idea is to have good data instead of falsifying stuff. So in looking through charts, we've seen a number of patients, like 400 of the patients over the last couple of years that have a social security number of 999999999. Well, we know that that's not the case. We were just punching in numbers to make the little thing go from red to blue, but it screws up our database and screws up our data validity and makes billing and some other things more complicated. And we covered that during the training sessions, and I'll do a separate presentation again on the basic concepts of charting, but I wanted to get this stuff out there today. So as you see here on the personnel, this auto-populated with their information. Now, if the case that Mike is now the provider, we just open it up, change his role to primary provider, whatever it happens to be. Other roles I'm going to show you here are, so somebody has to be the driver, somebody has to be the primary patient care provider. The primary patient care provider is also the ultimate responsibility for writing the chart. Other people could contribute, but the primary provider is also the primary author and is ultimately responsible for submitting and the accuracy of the chart. Anybody else would be assigned either secondary, third. You can have multiple secondaries, you can have multiple thirds if you want, doesn't matter. And then for anybody that's on orientation that's in their training phase, those would again become secondary providers, not ride-alongs, but secondary providers, because they are still providing care. They're still company employees. If we have a first responder along, obviously you could certainly select that role for them. I left a pilot in just purely because I like aviation and it seems kind of silly, so we probably pull that out here pretty quick. In any case, the ride-along would end up being for a civilian, somebody who is not a care provider, who's not a student, who's not in orientation, but is simply doing an observational ride-along. So perhaps if we had somebody from the press or say a county commissioner wanted to do a shift and see what it is that we do, we would include them as ride-along. So that would be in there. And I don't have it in, and I'll have to fix that, but student. So if we did have, say, an EMT or a paramedic student doing clinicals with us, then we would select them. We'd enter in their level that they're training at and then include student as their role. So in this particular case, we'll leave all the rest of that the same, and we move on now to first responder agencies. So in here, we'd like to see which agencies were at the scene that are our partner responders. So select whoever it might be, and let's just use, for example, Lake Rescue and Lake County Sheriff are both at the scene. If you know when they got there, you can punch it in, but this would be a good one to know is just about. This isn't hard and fast, but were they there less than 5 minutes, 5 to 15, greater than 15 minutes before we arrived, or perhaps they arrived after we did. That's great. If there's something else that this would apply, so if there were other services like a hazmat team or something, great, enter that in. And then if it were a disaster, this question would be appropriate. This one defaults to single because in most cases that's a single, but if we did have multiple patients, go ahead and put that. Mass casualty, it's somewhat subjective, but anything that would require more than the resources that we could handle with readily available. So that could still be a 2-car crash, or it could be the bus rollover. That's go ahead and select that as you wish. That is a reporting requirement for the state or for the data collection folks. Moving on, response information. The incident number is the same as what it was up in the earlier one, so that'll auto-populate. Your dispatch reason, this one gets a little tricky because the way our dispatch is done, we get dispatched a variety of ways or a variety of complaints. Please take the time to find the closest dispatch reason to what we did. So the best example I have would be, please respond to 123 Anywhere Street for adult female who's been vomiting for 3 days. That's what we're dispatched for. Well, I don't see vomiting for 3 days in here. So what do we have? Oh, there's other. Other should be an absolute last resort. If nothing else is even close, then great, other would apply, but it's rare that an other would come into place. So in this particular case, there's a fairly generic one. There's an unknown problem, and in this case, that would be better than other, but sick person. So this is for just general illness. We don't know what else is going on. Weak and dizzy all over. Great. We can pick sick person. Your odometer. Whatever odometer you need, we have to use it in with a tenths of a mile. So we need decimal. For the most part, we are doing the trip odometer, and in most cases, we zero it out from the garage. But if we're out driving around, or perhaps this is a second run, Some of you may zero it at the beginning of the shift and then just record stuff as you go throughout your shift. That is way okay, but you just need to keep track of it. So if you're starting at 0.0, we move on and we arrive on scene and it's now 0.7. We get to our destination. The destination is now 2.6. Oops, that's 0.726. 2.6, and getting back to the station, we are now going to be at 3.1, whatever it happens to be. Those could be 20s and 30s, depending if we go to Duluth or if we're coming out of Silver Bay, any of those things. This life threat, while not defaulted to anything, is going to be your decision. Is this truly life-threatening in the next few minutes, hours, however you decided? It's not as clearly defined as I'd like, so pick whichever one you'd like. In this case, it's going to be no. Over here, all of our response urgencies are immediate, regardless if we're going lights and siren or if we are going routine. Our responses are always immediate. As soon as we have a request for service, it is not scheduled. We don't have, we can't go sit and drink some coffee and mosey on over and then show up at 9 o'clock. Once we're requested, we are immediately making an effort to move towards the scene. That doesn't mean it has to be emergent, but it means it's immediate. Rarely, maybe 2, 3, 4 times throughout the year, we might have a non-immediate, and that would be probably a scheduled transfer that we knew about it more than 24 hours in advance. So if that were to change, we would let you know how to change that on your chart. Otherwise, everything is immediate. Emergency medical dispatching performed. Some of the dispatchers do, the dispatch center does have the capability, but we don't know if they're doing it or not. So we have it defaulted to not known, and we don't know which EMD card number, so we have it as NA. So incident address. Now there are some facilities that are pre-populated, so if we're going to the hospital for a transfer, you'd be using that template anyway. However, there are some other ones. We have Ecumen and we have some other stuff in here for some of the facilities available. We still need a street address. So what we're going to end up doing is the address would be 123 Anywhere Street. Anywhere? Any street. I mean my spelling. Now, if that was a business, let's say it's Walmart, you could put that in address number 2. If there is a unit or apartment number that we're going to, it's a trailer court and it's lot number 117, great, put that in there. If you're doing a transfer, sometimes it's nice to be able to say that we were out of the emergency department 3, or if we were off the floor, it'd be L201, bed 1. You could certainly do some of those kinds of things as well. And then in here, there's a couple of ways to put your favorite location or your city. So usually it's going to be 55616, for example. You pull your zip code, you set it from there. However, we can pull some other stuff. So if you're coming out of Finland, it's already pre-populated with some of this stuff. So say we are in the community of Silver Bay, and we can auto-populate all in there. Currently, we're not using zones, but we can add those in later. And then for some circumstances, if there isn't a good address, or say we have the address of the staging area, but the actual scene location, we do have GPS, you can certainly enter that in there, but it's not required. Okay, what is the location type? Usually, we go to somebody's home or residence, but sometimes some of these others apply. So healthcare facility. So if it is a clinic, hospital, or a skilled nursing facility, select healthcare facility. Lake, river, or ocean, if it is the beach, the shoreline of Lake Superior or a lake, we'll put the lake, river, ocean. Otherwise, places like the state parks or city parks, Gooseberry, for example, would be a place of recreation or sport. We don't really have any mines or quarries, etc. Public buildings would be governmental libraries, things like schools, etc. Otherwise, that would be more of a trade or service, just a business or a restaurant, something like that, unless it's a heavy industry or manufacturing facility would select that. Residential institution, so nursing home, jail, or a prison. So this would be, again, oh, I got nursing home both places. Which one do I use? This would be an assisted living type facility, not skilled nursing. So some of the memory cares or group homes where you have folks that have some learning disabilities or need some help with daily livings, but it is not skilled nursing. Jail, prison is kind of self-explanatory. Street or highway, pretty clear. However, we should again not have other unless we have absolutely nothing else that would fit. An unspecified place would not be acceptable, and not applicable would only be for runs we didn't actually go to a scene, which doesn't happen. Barriers to patient care does not have to be filled out. It is not defaulted to anything. So if there were none and you'd like to indicate that there were no barriers, please select none. If you leave it blank, I'll make no inference one way or the other. If one of these others do apply to how it was we provided care, just in general, we have some spaces later on where we can be very specific about it, but in general, go ahead and select those. All right, that's the whole first incident info tab. Moving on to the next tab is the call information. So where did we end up taking them? If we go to a facility for transporting, we go to Lakeview. Great, that's what we do. If we flew them, there is a destination called Intercept, air ambulance, rotorcraft, Intercept, ground ambulance, or fixed wing. So if we did an intercept or if we transferred care because we flew them out, occasionally we do air ambulance, occasionally we'll do more often we'll do a helicopter, occasionally it might be a ground ambulance. Otherwise, pick the hospital that you transport to. Now, if we did fly them and they flew to St. Luke's, our destination would be helicopter, rotor wing in this particular case. Okay. Occasionally, we do a transport back to a private residence or a nursing home if that's the case and it's not there. So if we did someplace other than Ecumen, there is a generic nursing home in there or private residence, which is very rare. Usually isn't going to be done. Now, let's say we were intending to go to Lakeview, and as part of our STEMI guideline, we end up transmitting an EKG, and they go, wait a second, you call report, they go, nope, got a good airway, pressures are okay, they need to go straight to cath lab, take them right straight to St. Mary's. So you were diverted from Lakeview, you ended up at St. Mary's. Okay. The destination type, usually self-explanatory. Occasionally, if we're flying them, again, it could be other EMS responder, air or ground, if it was a nursing home, etc. Usually it's going to be a hospital. So that's going to be the destination type. And if there was no transport, we do not transport it. A cancel would be not applicable. If we did a patient that then refused, not transported would be our choice. Destination determination. In most cases, even if it's where they want to go, any of the hospitals we routinely transport to, St. Luke's, St. Mary's, or Lakeview, closest appropriate facility is reasonable. Granted, sometimes it's not absolutely truly the closest by 2 miles or 20 miles, but it's within the realm of appropriate distance within the Medicare rules. So in most places, closest facility is what we select. If for some reason that we transport them other than what would be a reasonable distance, the patient choice would come into play. If they're not being transported, patient choice would come into play sometimes. It's okay to pick what you want, but most of the time, closest facility. Even when we're doing Lakeview to St. Luke's or Lakeview to St. Mary's, we're going to the closest appropriate facility, even though we're going for higher level of care, or more appropriately, not necessarily even higher level of care, but just care not available here. So they don't have cardiology or orthopedics. And so when we're writing our narratives, we'll talk about describing what service, what care cannot be provided here. And then we'd be going to the closest facility. If it's in the case of a diversion, select that. Insurance status, that is only really there for, say, their health partners patient. They're up here on vacation. We do a transfer from Lakeview down to Methodist, and it's because the insurance company wants them that way. We just indicate that the insurance company was prompting that. Occasionally, if you were directed to go someplace other than the online medical direction, might be a reason. The Specialty Resource Center, this is going to apply because it falls under one of the programs that are out. So we're going because it's a burn center, we're going because it's an immediate cardiovascular intervention cath lab, or it's a stroke center. Those are the three big ones. So if we're going, so sometimes we're going to St. Luke's because they have orthopedics, but it's a break from yesterday. It's not because it's a trauma surgery, trauma alert. It'll be closest facility. If they're going because they have they need an immediate orthopedic trauma intervention, then it would be specialty. Is it nitpicky? Yeah, but do your best at picking which ones those are. 911 caller, while not required, is actually pretty decent information. It helps us build a picture of how the system is being used. So, as part of your interview, you should be getting the events leading up to it. So, I had a sudden onset of chest pain today. Oh, really? What were you doing? Watching TV? Great. How long was that on? Okay, it's been going half an hour. And then, so what prompted you to call? Well, it just wasn't going away with the mail access said. So, did you call, or did your family, or whatever? So in most cases, big deal if it's the patient or the family. It's nice to know, though, is third party. So say we get called for the slumper in the park. No problem, pan out in the park. We arrive, rescue arrives, police all come up, and the guy's just taking a nap. Said, did you call 911? Nope. Did you need medical attention? Nope. Great. No patient found. There was nothing there. There wasn't a patient. It was just a Good Samaritan third party caller. So you can do that. So again, if you can get that information, great. The response request. In most cases, we are going to be doing a 911 response. There are two others that will be used somewhat. Intercept is not going to be used internally if we're doing our own medic coming in, but the intercept would then be as if, say, Cook County Grand Marais were coming down and needed some help with one of our medics. That would be an intercept. Where the other one is interfacility transfer. So 911 request, if we're going on a 911 call, somebody called 911, we're heading on out to somebody's residence, going to a scene, going to Ecumen, whatever. Most of those are going to be the case, including fire standbys, law enforcement standbys. You have standby over here, I know. That is only going to be used for our internal coverage documentation. So when we go to Gooseberry to cover for each other, standby would be the only time we use that. Otherwise, if we're going to the fire, this response request would be 911 response. Otherwise, it'll be unscheduled interfacility transfer. In 99% of the cases, it's going to be one of those two if we're going on an actual call. There's an odd chance that somebody walks in, or once or twice a year when we do a scheduled, we'll let you know when to do those. And again, if Cook County or Canadians are coming through and need an intercept, great. That would be done that way. All right. Any questions? Let me know. All right. The primary role of the unit defaults to BLS ground transport. However, if we do have a paramedic on board, we will change that to ALS ground transport. Response disposition. This is going to be another one that's just make sure we get this all straightened out. It doesn't absolutely matter which one you pick. We can fix those in the back, but it helps prompt proper billing. If there's a paramedic on board or a paramedic has done an assessment, and it gets a little tricky, so let's just leave it at a paramedic on board, whether he's attending or not, whether she's attending or not, is ALS treated and transported. The EMT can still be attending, but the ALS assessment has been done. If there are only two paramedic or two EMTs on board, then treated and transported by EMS BLS. Patient refused care. This is a new one for some of you. There is no treatment required, treated and released, etc. All patients that are not transported will be considered patient refused care. And I'll show you how to do that later on. There's some checklists we're going to use, but patient refused care. This takes a lot of the liability, puts it back on the patient that they do not want to go. There are certain patients that we just know they don't need to go, but we're going to recommend and offer what we think is wrong, what we've done to make that determination, recognizing that our ability to do in-depth assessments, labs, imaging, that kind of stuff is not available to us, and that they should be evaluated by a physician in the emergency department. If they still continue to refuse, that's fine. They have that right to do that, but we offered it, we'll return for any reason at any time, and then they'll sign the refusal. But that puts that back on the patient. Treated and transferred care would be for those patients that we fly. So we intercept with LifeLink and they land at the scene, or that we meet someplace and we send them off, or if we were to do an intercept with Gold Cross, for example. No patient found. That would be the case of, again, the person at the park. Man down at the park underneath the tree. We all arrive, and the guy goes, "What the hell's going on here?" And some people called 911. Do you have any problems? Do you need medical attention? Nope, nope. I'm just taking a nap. Oh, okay, great. So it was unfounded. That would be no patient found. Or difficulty breathing in the red car at the parking lot at Split Rock. We get there, there's no red car, there's nothing. We've done a thorough investigation. We can't find anything. Again, no patient found. Which would be different than we are on the way. The police have looked around, can't find anybody. They go to the park, find out the guy was just napping and wasn't a problem. We haven't made contact yet. And ambulance can cancel. Great, now we're canceled. So that's a little different than no patient found. Dead at scene is pretty self-explanatory. Either they're dead when we arrive and we don't do anything, or we start working and they're dead after we determine to provide resuscitation. We call it at the scene if that were the case. Standby only, so we get called fire at 800 7th Avenue, Two Harbors for a fire standby. So our response request is 911. Our dispatch reason is fire standby, and in this case, if there were no patients, we would just simply have it end up being standby only, no patient contacts. We'll get cleared by command. If we were to do a transfer of patient care, if we were to do an intercept, for example, want to fly them out via Lifelink. So we will call, put in here Lifelink 3. When did we do that patient transfer? And if we can, we'll get their run number. So their run number was 14-236. What that does is when we send our report, now let's say this is a trauma, guy was ejected from a vehicle. So we write a report for John Anderson and show him as being injured, involved in a crash. He's got a neck injury, a back injury. And then Lifelink, they have to write a report. They send it also to the state. It would look like there were 2 people injured in car crashes that day in our area, when it really was only the 1 patient. So this allows those 2 calls to be linked in the system so we don't double report traumatic injuries or that kind of thing. So that is how that works. So the other one here, so that was the time of that transfer. So this would end up being is if we say did an intercept, Gold Cross came down, or excuse me, say Grand Marais came and dropped off a patient to us instead. So let's clear that out. Say we did an intercept with Cook County. They had only 2 EMTs on today and they needed a medic. And so their run number was 14-560 because they had a lot of runs this year. Whatever. So that's how you would use that. This time ALS or alternate care called could simply be, again, so when did you request that additional intercept? You could use this internally for when we requested our medic to respond. Response mode to scene. It defaults to for the 911, defaults to lights and siren, because in most cases on 911s we do lights and sirens. Now that's not always the case. If it isn't, go ahead and change it to no lights and sirens. Or we were originally, and then we got slowed to routine, or the other way around. We started routine and we got told that, oh, CPR is in progress, so great, we light them up. However, so this has to have some sort of a response if we're going to a scene. Transport mode from the scene. In most cases, we do not transport emergently, so it defaults to no lights and sirens. But if you don't transport, or if you do code 3, or make those changes. Remember, there's defaults. Just because it's not red, it doesn't mean you don't need to review it. So look at every tab and make sure everything's covered as you're going through. So in most cases, no lights or sirens. If we didn't transport, so if they were dead at the scene, if we did a no load, if we flew them from the scene, then not applicable. Okay. All right. So additional lights or sirens. Great. So vehicle type defaults to ambulance. We don't really have any other vehicles, but I have it there just in case. We respond in a pickup or a bus, which we don't have right now, but maybe someday. Here's where your delays can be entered. So we have barriers to patient care earlier in the chart, but in here, if we have a specific problem in the response because it took us longer, maybe it's 3 feet of snow, so we have a weather problem. Maybe we have a response delay because we didn't get a good address, or it's an excessive distance. If it's a greater than probably 20-minute response, distance might become a factor we want to just make a note of. Was there a safety issue because it was a hostile environment? We couldn't get through. Oh, that would be Yeah, that would be a response delay. Was traffic an issue? Again, we're responding routine, but it's just heavy traffic on a Sunday afternoon, and it took us longer to get there than it normally would. Vehicle crash and vehicle failure. These are not that we were going to a vehicle crash, but we had a crash while we were on the way, or we had a vehicle failure. That's what those would be. Same thing, and there's scene delays or some other stuff. Extrication greater than 20 minutes. That would be truly a vehicle extrication. Patient access delay would meaning we couldn't find keys. They were in such a we couldn't get through the doors. We had to kick in a door. We had to wait for a code or something like that. Anything else that would apply, again, crash failure, something along those lines. Why was your scene time extended? And I would consider entering something. Again, they're not defaulted. So if there were none and you would like to indicate that there were none, I believe there is a none. There isn't a none, so just leave it alone. So if there was, enter it. Transport delay, same kind of thing. And one other scene delay, I'll come back to that, is staff delay. Where did it go? Here. That would really apply if we go to the hospital for a transfer, we get there and the staff there have not gotten their paperwork together, or they aren't ready for the transfer when we arrive, and we're sitting in the hospital for 30 minutes. It would be probably appropriate just to check that box of why it took so long for us to get around. Transport, same thing, if it was bad weather, etc. And then the turnaround is if you're at the hospital for an extended period of time before you clear, just indicate why that would be. Staff delay, you couldn't get report given to somebody, you had a really messy call, so we had to do decontamination, cleanup, etc. Excuse me again. So those could be done. They do not have to be done every call, but if there is something, go ahead and put an indicator. Demographic information. So much like we talked about during the other part of the class would be is you are the person that is most closest to the best source of this information, the patient, for the longest. The more information we can get from the person that has that information, the better our chances are of getting good, accurate information that then can lead to good patient care, can lead to good training, can lead to good reimbursement from insurance if we have all of this stuff. If you don't get the Social Security number, and now our billing folks have to do it, or Mike has to look it up, or Danielle has to go and track this all down, we have to add hours, days, sometimes weeks into getting the bill out. So if it was somebody that was traveling in the area, we didn't get a good phone number, we may never even get this stuff tracked down. So take the time to get their number. If it's somebody that's local, check the repeat patients first. So you can punch in here, do a search, find if the patient is already in our system. If they are, select that. If we can pull from the repeat patient database, the name, address, birth date, social security numbers, phone numbers, medical history, medicines, all of that imports in and just needs to be reviewed for accuracy. Some people change medicines. If it was one of those patients where we had 999, we'd like to get that updated and changed to be accurate. But it saves a lot of data entry, and we don't have duplicate patients in the system. So check the repeat patients first. If they're not in there, then go ahead and enter their name. And I forgot to say this, but we've decided that, again, in keeping with the convention, we're going to be using all caps. So putting in their name or Anderson, whatever it happens to be. So as you noticed, some names popped in there really quickly. Those would be repeat patients that are already in the database. So if you see one of those, verify that that is the right patient. If you pull in an incorrect patient, there is an undo button. I'm not going to show you how that works right now because this is a live database and I don't want to have any protected health information floating around out there. But excuse me, if you pulled in the wrong Joe Anderson, for example, you could then hit the undo button and find Joseph Anderson and put him in there. Okay. So in here, everything needs to be here. Last name, first name, if they have a middle, great. Generation would be as if they're a second, third, junior, whatever it happens to be. Gender must be filled out. And I know it sounds kind of funny, but it does come up from time to time. Gender will be current plumbing. So male, female, whatever they were born with, whatever they would wish to be called, whatever they currently have for plumbing is their gender as far as this chart is concerned. We certainly treat them with all the respect that they deserve, and if they prefer to be called Josie instead of Joe, whatever. Fill that out. Date of birth needs to be entered. If you don't know their date of birth, they're unresponsive, you can estimate an age. Social security number. Only complete, accurate social security number should be entered. If they don't know it, refuse to give it, fine. If we can get it from the hospital, great. I know the face sheets are showing up with only the last four. Please ask the HUC or whoever's printing it out for you if they could get the whole social for you. It is our right. We are allowed to have that. It is not a violation of HIPAA rules. It actually makes that easier for us to get. A primary or the best number to reach them at, that kind of thing. Over here, race and ethnicity is not required, but it may help us in some grant excuse me, requests, and it can help for just statistical reporting on population, perhaps even from an epidemiological standpoint on disease process and injuries in various ethnic groups. Driver's license, DL's not important. Again, if we punch in a birth date, the age will auto-populate. If not, estimate that and put it in there. Another new one, and while it's over in the kilograms as the highlighted one, usually we talk in pounds, but every patient we should enter a weight on. Now, why? It doesn't really matter. Well, there's a couple of times where if we get good at it, it's much like doing a physical exam or physical assessment on every patient. Well, most of them, you have normal lung sounds. When you finally do hear irregular lung sounds, you've already listened to 100 good sounds, normal sounds. Now, when you hear the unusual, it's much more prevalent to you. The same thing goes with weight, and where that really comes into play is two areas, mainly medication administration. A number of medications are actually based on weight, so the dosing is a weight-based, so many milligrams per kilogram or so many micrograms per kilogram per hour. So weight is a really important one. The second one is there are some weight restrictions on helicopter evacuations of patients. So getting a patient weight or becoming better at estimating patient weights is a good practice to get into. And so by estimating patient weights on every patient, we'll get better at doing that. So go ahead and guesstimate the weight. I'm not the best at it, but start working on it. Ask them how much they weigh. It can make life a lot easier and safer for them if we do end up doing medications, if we can be better at doing those kinds of things. So the address, this is going to be patient demographic, so their patient address. There is a get incident address button. That's a really nice tool, especially when we go, half of our 911 calls are to somebody's home, and that's where they live. That's also the scene. So great, get incident address. It pulls it all in. Again, with the tools, the things that make life easier, use with caution. The get incident address button should not be used when we go to the hospital. I've seen a number of charts that have come through from time to time here that their address is, whatever, 311 4th Avenue or 4th Street, and I'm going, wait a second, isn't that the, yeah, that's the hospital. So patient address. All those other things come into play. Again, we can punch in, what do you call it, set from postal code, or we can pull from favorite location, whatever. Here's where that patient care number works. So we're at the crash. We've put in all this incident info, the scene info. We're starting to work on this demographic for our first patient, but now we have 2 more patients to do. What we can do is say, oh, all that information's in the system. I want to add a new patient. They're going to get a patient care report number 2. I click add new patient, starts a new run for me. So now I have spouse of the first guy, or first one. The incident info is all in there, so response information is all in there, whatever it happens to be. Now all I need to do is just add the name and etc. I can go get their signature. Same thing can happen with the third patient, and it makes that easier. This is that validity rules. This is where you can put in why you didn't have something in there. The other thing that you can do is fill in reasons for the whole thing. So if the reason you didn't have all of that stuff, just click on that, say OK. All right. So back to the original chart we're talking about, patient information. So as much information as we can get. If they have an advanced directive, great, go ahead and enter it here. Next of kin is nice to have if you've got time to put it in there. Where it's really important and actually really is required is for minors or those that are not able to care for themselves. So if we have a child, the patient information is in the top, but now we have their parent or their guardian's information here. The nice thing with this is when you go to get signatures, this is where it will import that name from and phone number. So just who they are, etc. Occasionally somebody will have an alternate address. Maybe they vacation here, they're snowbirds, and they have a summer cabin in out in the county someplace. And so that's where the scene was, and that's probably their regular mailing address over the summer, but they maybe moved back to Florida. Go ahead and put this in there. The other one that this would apply to perhaps would be a college student perhaps in the area that has an apartment here in the Duluth area, was visiting, broke their ankle at Gooseberry, but their permanent address, maybe their parents, or they have maybe they're a military member and they have a legal permanent address someplace else. That's where this would go. A chance for us to be able to track down some of that information if we needed to down the road. All right, so moving on in down to the actual patient assessment and patient care stuff. So chief complaint and onset date and time. So when did this start? Now, I've had a toothache for 3 weeks. Well, yeah, we could put 3 weeks ago up in here, but what prompted you to call today? Well, overnight it really got bad. Well, what about time? So was that midnight, 3 o'clock? Yeah, it was about 3 o'clock. So today at, let's call it, 0300. And what was the problem again? My tooth, my tooth really hurts. In a lot of cases, I've been seeing is a diagnosis or a provider impression in here. So this should be a quote or a paraphrase or at least a synopsis of what the patient is complaining of. This could be, for example, you get dispatched for a seizure, you arrive on scene, the police are waving you up to the front step, you meet a guy that's sitting on the step and you say, "What's up?" "Oh, my leg itches really bad." "Oh, okay." And as you sit down, you see a big knife sticking out of his back. What would your dispatch reason be? Seizure. What was your patient's chief complaint? My leg itches really bad. What's your provider impression? Traumatic injury. There's a big knife sticking out of this guy's back. So they don't have to all match. Now, more normally they do, but so my tooth really hurts. How long has that been hurting? Oh, it's been hurting for, so this particular episode has been for, 6 hours. Okay. Secondary complaint. If he has a total secondary complaint, enter it here. This is another place where, for example, on transfers especially, you ask the patient, "Hey, what's your problem?" So they say, "Hey, I feel fine." Okay, they've been feeling fine for the last 6 hours, but diagnosed with atrial fibrillation, and CHF and whatever. So atrial fibrillation and CHF. So it's diagnosed with that in the last day. So that could be a more of a description, or we go and the patient's confused and can't even answer their question. That might be their chief complaint is altered level of consciousness, unresponsive. But staff concerned about high ecumen or something for the last day, whatever it is. Alcohol or drug use. This is not legally binding. This is mainly just to see how much alcohol and perhaps drugs are impacting some of our responses or conditions. If there's no apparent, great. If there is, sure looks like it. Patient denies it, but you see stuff. So patient denies, but you smell it and you see stuff, or whatever. Patient admits to it. Great. And I ask just about everybody. It's just interesting information, but it can help us in some statistical stuff, especially when we start doing trauma surveys. How many injuries are related to or have at least a contributing factor, perhaps, of alcohol and pharmaceuticals. All right. So, primary symptom. Everybody, what is their primary symptom? Again, do the best we can to come up with the closest fitting. What do you think is the most prominent? Using that example before, we got dispatched for the seizure, which isn't even a factor at this one. The guy says his leg itches, but you're worried about traumatic injury. In this particular case, we would say is that we're very worried about a wound is our first thing, and then our secondary stuff that we're worried about is the back pain, the bleeding, etc. Trying to find other ones. Rash, itching, he's got that symptom. It's not really a big deal, but however, put those in there. Now, if you do have to use an other, great, you can select other, but make a description of that in the narrative. Your primary symptom is rarely going to be other. But if you have to, go ahead and use that. Anatomic location, where generally is this? Sometimes it's global, sometimes it's whatever. In this particular case, we're using the trauma maybe, and the orgo system in this case is musculoskeletal because it's poking through into his chest. If it's an injury, yes or no. If it's, trauma, if there's a possible injury, I don't know why they asked the question this way. It's either yes or no. If there's an injury, select yes. If there's no injury, say no. If there is, what's the cause? Get as close as you can. What's the mechanism? If there's multiples, go ahead, but pick the best. Was it intentional, unintentional, an assault? If there was a fall, how far was the fall? So, and then if recording somebody who was standing and fell, the height that their height is what we're going to record as the fall. Past medical history, this should never be blank unless we didn't have a patient. But for any patient, this cannot be blank. You have to have something. Excuse me. The patient denies it, unable to obtain it because they're unresponsive, whatever the case may be. Otherwise, select what you want. And this can be multiple selections. So they have cancer liver, they have had a cardiac angioplasty, they've got congestive heart failure, and they're diabetic, and they have chronic respiratory emphysema. Great. Those all show up. Who did you get that history from? It was the family, or maybe it was somebody else. Pregnancy. Now, if you have a male patient, which I haven't selected yet, I didn't select gender earlier on, but if it's a male patient, this won't even show up. Female patient, there are only 3 answers that you can select on this one. It's going to be yes, no, or not known. Okay? Yes, no, or not known. We don't know. We know, or we, can't. I can't be pregnant. So that's it for female patient. Again, female patient, this should not be blank. All right. If under here we had to select other, at least narrow it down to cancer, other cancer condition, or cardiac, other cardiac condition, just a generic other is the least desirable, and then describe what that is. So if you have something in here, generally there should be an other something up there, and this is the description down below. If we were to get this practitioner name would be, if we obtained history from them, that's what this is for. I don't care who we get. We don't need to get their name on who gave us that history. Patient drug allergies, that also should not be blank. It's either what they're allergic to, that they're not allergic to anything, or we're unable to determine that because they're not able to give it to us. So unable to obtain, denies, etc., etc. So enter those in there. This one can be blank. If they do have an environmental food allergy, go ahead and put it in. I don't put denies in that one. And then medications. Please list all their medications. Doses are optional. They're going to do a reconciliation at the hospital, but any of the medications that they're currently taking. If we pull in a repeat patient, verify that meds list is current. Again, this one should not be blank. Patient unable to obtain, patient doesn't have any or denies any medications, or enter the medications. Please review them. So this, if we're pulling those in from someplace else, that we have them. Also, just a note, C list is not an acceptable answer. We don't have a copy of the list, so C list is not acceptable to put into this one. Moving on. As with what we're talking about in the email and in the class, all patients get a complete physical exam every time. Every patient, every contact, every time we see a patient, they get a physical exam. There is a tool that you can use. There's a couple of ways we can report that. I'll show you here. If you choose not to use these, right now this is an optional piece of how to record it. So it's either using this tool, which is the preferred method because it becomes a data element. It lets us search and to see what kind of physical findings you were coming up with. You either use this, or you have to have a complete physical exam documented in your narrative. So let me show you how to use this particular one. So you have a patient assessment tool. Now it says medical, but everybody gets this assessment because everybody gets complete. You will have already selected the patient gender earlier on, so we'll default to that. So let's just say that we have okay, I'm sorry, I'm going to make this just a little bigger for me. All right, so what time was the assessment done? So I did it 10 minutes ago, so we're going to call it at 10:15 is when I did the assessment. I had already, the weight will populate in, but this guy weighs 185 pounds, and it turns out to 83.9 kilos. Okay, great. So a couple of ways to do this. You can go through each body system and select it. So we can click on the skin, and it was cap refill less than 2 seconds. It was dry. It was, where's that, warm, and normal. However you want to do it. You can put in something else. Mild acne on face. If you can, how detailed you want to get, you say okay, great. So now it points just to generic to that was skin. Okay. Other ways to do that would be, so they're complaining of a headache. So we click on their head, and they say they have pain or tenderness. Complains of headache at 3 out of 10. Okay. But they have symmetrical face. There's no other problems, drainage, anything like that. Say, okay, so now we have a head covered. We can go through all that. Other ways to do that. So you can do site selection. So let's say we want to do their right arm. We click on right arm, and it's normal. We say, okay, well, great. That just clicks to the right arm. But let's say we want to specifically say on their left arm that they have some pain. They've got good CMS. But there's pain or tenderness, complains of bicep pain. Okay. Now, instead of it just pointing to the arm in general, it points to right where we clicked. So that's where that pain, if we really want to isolate that out, we can certainly do that. Now, the other way to do this is we could say, never mind, everything's normal except for the left arm, which had pain and tenderness, although they still had good CMS, bicep pain at 6 out of 10. Say okay for that. We did not check the genital urinary, so we didn't do it, so we're just going to say not done. And we didn't listen to heart tones, so that was not done. That's okay. And everything else is fine. Great, so it's all normals. Again, if they're saying they have altered level of consciousness, we should probably be more specific about these. That's so chest and lungs. So not only are they we think it's normal. So a normal chest assessment, normal clear equal breath sounds, and we want to be even sounds present in all lung fields. We really want to be clear, denies chest pain, pressure. Okay. So great. We've been really clear about all that. We've got that whole exam. And now when we're done with that, we save it, and now we have a complete physical exam that also will print on out. Now that we have that baseline physical exam, if something were to change, so now at our current time, so let's say it's 10:30, and the patient now, positive CMS, normal. Pain, complains of pain, resolved. Something like that. So now you can make that exception called the save. So now at 10:30, we have a change in just that one side. At least a complete physical exam for everybody. Now, if all you did was a focused exam, great. Select the things that you did do and show what it is that your exam was done. If you choose not to use this tool, you must put all of that, your complete head-to-toe exam, in the narrative. In addition to this being on every patient, sometimes there's an injury. So let's say that left bicep pain was a result of an injury. So again, we can click right on that left bicep and say that there is pain and tenderness, but without bruising. Or maybe there was bruising. So left bicep, so pain, swelling without, that's probably pretty much self-explanatory. Or you can type in something to describe that. So show where that was. If you really want to have, you need to do something, you could certainly put, say they were run over by a truck, and you want to put in their tire tracks of the truck, where that was. There's the tread marks across their chest, whatever. So that is available to you as well. You can also do site selection and just in general, say upper extremities, and you could type in left bicep pain. something like that. So great. Now it just puts a generic one in instead of where we pointed directly. So that's kind of how that all works. Okay. So that would be on injuries. And then the last tool is in here, and this is something that I think is really slick. I have a real hard time remembering rule of nines. I think the chest is 9, this is 9. So the abdomen is 9, the chest is 9, the whole head is, I believe 9, 8, 9 for each arm, 18 for each leg, etc., etc. Hold on one second here.